Welcome everyone to our session, You Eat with Your Eyes First, Designing Compelling Plant-Forward Visuals. As a reminder, you can click on any individual screen to maximize it. And also to engage with our presenters, please put your questions or comments either in the chat or the Q&A. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Mike Lee, co-founder and co-CEO of Alpha Food Labs. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Patricia, for having me on here. I'm excited to moderate this session today with all of you. We have two very talented designers and creatives here to share their kind of points of view. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to bring each of them up one at a time to share some imagery and talk through some of the work that they've done before. We'll do some Q&A with each of them, and then we'll finish with kind of Q&A for both and open it up to the floor for questions from all of you out there in the audience. So that's the plan for today. Let's dive right in. Christine Hahn is the first one I'm going to bring up to the stage in a minute. Christine Hahn, she's an NYC-based commercial and editorial photographer. She specializes in food, portraits, and lifestyle. She received a Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology from Columbia University, and soon after discovered that photography was the best way people in the world around her. Her approach is relaxed and collaborative, and she excels in making natural, authentic imagery that brings out the inherent beauty in every subject. She's a regular contributor at A Cup of Joe, and her clients include Pepsi, Shake Shack, Starbucks, and The Kitchen, amongst many others. You can find Christine on Instagram at Christine Shoots. Welcome to the stage, Christine Hahn.
Here I am. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Mike. I'm really happy to be here. And my hope is that I can help you when it comes to creating your own images. So I want to talk about my overall approach, but if you guys have technical questions like geeky camera stuff, I'm happy to answer those as well at the end, or you can type them in the chat box. Okay. So when I was thinking about how do I approach food photography when it's plant forward versus not, it's actually the same. The principles of photography don't change. So it's the givens are beautiful light, color, and composition, for me anyway. And I think this first image is a great example of all of that coming together. And then even more importantly than that, I think, is what makes the viewer stop and connect with an image. And it's usually just something as simple as, I really want to eat that, or that looks so good, or oh, that's so comforting, or it looks so comforting. And so it's an emotional response. And so for me, I'm always intuitively looking for that. Like, how can I make somebody come into this picture with me and feel what I'm feeling so that they too want to eat it? So that actually doesn't change whether it's plant forward or not. So I'll just go with how I approach all of food photography, and it's really the same principles. And then there's some things like, if you're trying to appeal to an audience who's not used to eating plant-forward meals and we need to appeal to them, I'll talk about that in a little bit as well. Okay, next slide, Patty. Okay, so I like to keep things really simple and really natural, and that applies to all the photography that I do, but you can see here how that works very well for this bunch of leafy greens. It's unexpected view. That's true, because you don't usually look at this close. But what I'm looking for here is its inherent beauty, which is, to me, the texture, the color, the aliveness, and the freshness of what's in front of me. So what I'm doing is whatever's in front of me, I look at it and I look for what's unique or what's the most beautiful element that I see in it, and I capture that, or I hope to capture that. And so you can go as simple as this. This is actually a top seller in my stock portfolio. So you can see how people really respond to that simplicity. And to me, it makes me feel alive. And maybe that's the emotional connection that people are responding to here. Okay, next slide, Patty, please. Okay, and continuing on the simple approach, this is a veggie burger. And actually, I kept it. I wanted to show it to you because my husband, his response to this was, "This is the best veggie burger that I've ever seen." And when you look at it, it's really quite simple. There's not a lot of propping. It's just sitting on a plate. But it is looking at, it does show all of the components of it and its own like uniqueness, which is the patty and then all the other components on top. So I think the only catch here I would say is that you would need a good food stylist or somebody who can prepare the dish itself in a way that's visually appealing. So that is important. I'm not just saying that you could slap something together and then have it look like this, but this is just to illustrate that you don't need a lot of extra stuff. You just need the food to look really, really good. And then good light and shoot it, and there it is. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so this is where, so I just shot a book called The Weekday Vegetarians with Jenny Rosenstrack. She's the author of this really popular blog called Dinner a Love Story. And so she's been whipping up simple dinner time meals for families for a while. And recently they made a switch from meat heavy and flipped it for health and sustainability reasons to only eating meat on weekends. And so she had a whole cookbook around that. And this is where we did approach it a little differently in terms of how are we going to photographically, visually, how are we going to make it appealing to non-vegetarian audiences. And so what we focused on here was heartiness, unctuousness, appealing to possibly hesitant meat eaters who are hesitant that it's not going to be fulfilling. And so visually, we wanted everything to look abundant and fresh and rich and even creamy and unctuous. And so you can see that play in the cover here. We actually even had to reshoot one of the dishes because we didn't feel like it looked hearty enough. But anyway, so I'll take you through some of the images in her book because that's the most recent example, and I think a relevant one in terms of if you're speaking to an audience that's not already plant forward. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is her mushroom galette, and I think it looks so good. I want to eat it now. It's just so delicious and savory. And for me, when I was planning the image, when we were planning the image, I wanted it to fill the frame, and I wanted it to be on the parchment because it really connects me with that moment when it comes out of the oven and it's hot and bubbling. And so that connection to that moment to me is what makes it extra appealing, and I want to eat it. And the rest of it, again, it's simple. There's no propping here except for the parchment paper. You bring out what's good about this dish, which is already the pastry dough browned and the mushrooms that are beautiful and browned. And it's just all about the ingredients and the freshness and the abundance of it. So those are the same themes that keep coming up when it comes to any food. But if you're trying to appeal to an audience that's, traditionally meat loving, you want to really put that in their faces, that it looks very hearty and you're not losing any of the delicious, savory, fulfilling unctuousness. Okay, next slide, please. This is an example of how you can use color and to just draw you in, and then also adding creaminess when there's like a vegetable heavy dish that you're highlighting. We did put a lot of yogurt underneath there to convey also that creaminess that people might be missing. And also the hummus on the side, it's beautiful colors, but that also to me, it speaks to it's like a heartiness, a creaminess that we might miss otherwise. Okay, next. Next slide, please, Patty. Thank you. Okay, and this here, it's just like hot and cheesy and gooey and comforting. It's an immediate emotional response for me. And it's about, I feel like I'm gonna be seated at the table. I mean, that I am at the table and someone's gonna serve this deliciousness to me. And so you can do that by bringing in life, bringing in people, bringing in hands. And so all of that, to me, when I look at it, it's like an instantaneous response. And that I don't even care if it's meat or not. It just looks comforting, and someone's going to serve it to me, which is to me like a very wonderful thing. Okay, next slide, please. This also brings an example of bringing life into a photograph, and it conveys to me just relaxed, fun summer, outdoors, backyard, sparkling water, and it's the context that surrounds the food. In this case, I think that makes it extra appealing. The food itself is a bean burger, so it's harder to make that kind of thing look beautiful on its own. And so then in those cases, I do tend to bring in context to make you feel something around that. And in this case, like I said, it's just, to me, it's like a summer barbecue, and I want in. Okay, next slide, please. And then the last and really important point here is that I depend on other professionals. So good styling, good design, to come together with the photography to really elevate the photography and to elevate each other and make a really great image that sells the food. So in this case, this is Shake Shack's veggie burger. I think it's one of the first ones, maybe the first one. And I love it because of the design. So the veggie patty itself, I don't think it's particularly appealing, to be honest. But because the designer or it brings in this really fun element, and to me, it makes the whole thing look appealing because it's like fun, playful curiosity, like, oh, I want to eat that, or I want to try it, and that's the kind of response I have emotionally to that, and that works too. Next slide, please. And this is the same burger, but so when I shot this, it was just a row of burgers. And then when the design team took it, they did this. They divided the picture into 3, and then they added their wonderful vegetable designs on top. And I just think it made my image look 100 times better. So it's all these elements come together and contribute to making a successful image. But to me, I think it's really comes down to being simple, looking for what's inherently beautiful and individual about what's in front of you, and then highlighting and enhancing that. And of course, good light, composition, that's all a given. But yeah, that's the overall approach. And let me know if you have any questions later. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Christine. We've got some stuff buzzing in the chat, a few of which are asking, do you do classes and things like that? So I think the content is hitting with people.
Wonderful.
Up front, you talked about simplicity, and I want to dive deeper into that. You know, as chefs, we all know that I think simple things are often the hardest, right? You think about a loaf of bread. It's got just a few ingredients, but you have nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and you've got to nail every single piece of it to make, you know, excellent bread and not just kind of everyday run-of-the-mill bread. So, you know, for you, when you talk about focusing on simplicity in your imagery, you mentioned some things like light and composition, but can you kind of give like a little bit more detail on, like, you know, what are the things you got to nail to make simple images look really good?
When it's simple, I don't want to say it so harshly, but you don't make mistakes in it, right? So you have to make sure that the thing itself is the best version of itself. So it really is just about the thing itself, and then making, like that loaf of bread, for instance, you've really made that loaf of bread into what you would serve someone and be proud of. And then the photographer can come in and see something in that perhaps you don't see, but it comes together when you're actually working together. And then you see that, let's see how to explain. Basically, someone gives me something that's already beautiful, and then I look and find even more beauty in it, and then I can highlight that. And often simple means getting close. It means taking away all the extraneous things from the frame. I mean, half of photography for me is really removing things, believe it or not. It's like moving things out of the way, and paying attention to the whole frame. Like, what are you actually putting in there? So you might see your beautiful loaf of bread, and I might see some clutter in the background as well. And I don't want to see that. So simple meaning really, what is it that's most beautiful and appealing about what you're presenting? And then making sure that that comes through and leaving all the distractions out. As for lighting, for me, it's mimicking natural light. So all of this stuff you see, I think all of it is lit with strobes, but it looks to me like the human eye sees it.
Yeah.
And so that's how I approach the lighting in terms of simplicity.
Got it. Awesome. And the other thing you were talking about, which I think resonates, is your goal, I think, is to find the emotional response that makes the viewer stop. You know, can you describe that a little bit more? Like, what are some of these? How do you translate an emotional response into imagery to get people to stop scrolling or walking or whatever?
Oh gosh, it gets ever harder because of all the content that's out there. It's an intuitive thing for me. I mean, number one, because I'm a photographer, it's about light. Like I'm always, if something is lit beautifully and well, and what does that mean in terms of, you know, tangible stuff? For me, it's like, it's just nature, natural light. It connects me, it stops me, it pauses me from my head, and it makes me stop and just look and connect with an image based on that kind of just visual light stopping.
Yeah.
And then for food, for me, it's a lot about comfort. When I look at something, I want to be comforted. And so if it's like bringing hands in, bringing people in, it brings that life element to it. If you feel connected to it, you know, in that way, it can also really stop you in your tracks, right?
Yeah.
And then what else? Oh, and just because I'm thinking visually here, it's always, for me, I always stop because something looks just stunning and beautiful. That usually means that the food is really, really fresh and really colorful, and my eye is just going to the color and the composition. So, you know, there's all of those that come into play. But I think when, for instance, when my husband looks at my images, he's just like, oh my God, that looks so good. I just like, or I want to go to that party. Like, what's going on? You know, so it's something, it's kind of like, I don't even know how to put it into words. It's something that's always been intuitive to me that I just draw in and I respond to.
Well, a metaphor that might be a good bridge that I think about as chef is, you know, part of being a good chef is eating a wide, diverse range of things and trying to capture those experiences, and like you file them in your head. So you kind of have this library of like moments to tap into, and then you can kind of recreate them. Like, do you think that's a similar thing for you? Just looking at images all your life and trying to create a library of like, oh my God, what makes me feel? Like, does that influence how you shoot?
Yeah, I don't know if it's conscious, but it certainly is part of it, because all of your life experiences, everything you've ever seen is going to influence how you look at things.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but for me, it's even about sound, you know, about sound and smell and the feel of the air and things like that. That's what I'm trying to actually put into a photograph. And I mean, with food, I don't know. I shoot a lot of portraits and lifestyle as well, so I'm thinking about all of that. But it is about, like, for me, it's like all the sensory experiences I have. How do I bring that into a two-dimensional image? And so moments, of course, and then also it's a general sensory thing for me. How do I make that, convey that to an audience?
Awesome. Well, Christine, thanks again. Stick around. We'll do some more questions after Laureen, but we're going to bring on Laureen Moyal to the stage here. Thanks again, Christine. We'll see you in a few minutes. So as she's being brought up to the screen, Laureen Moyal, she is the co-founder and partner at Paperwhite. She has an extensive experience in developing integrated branding solutions and dynamic web experiences for food-related brands, hospitality, and dynamic startups. Laureen studied design at ISAG Penningham in Paris and the Rhode Island School of Design, where she received her BFA. She's been a visiting critic at Parsons, the New School for Design, and taught branding at the Maryland Institute College of Art for several years. She can be found on Instagram at Paperwhite-Studio. Please welcome Laureen.
Thank you, Mike. So my slideshow is actually going to be a series of images in no particular order that all relate to one case study for us, which is by Chloe. The reason I chose by Chloe is because 6 years ago when we started work on this project, I think they were quite the trailblazer in terms of plant-based fast casual. And in working with them for the last almost 6 years, we've covered a lot of ground and, you know, been able to touch a lot of aspects from a design standpoint. So some of the things that I want to talk about how we came to this brand are the first thing when approaching by Chloe, you know, it was really important for us to align this with non-plant-based brands from a visual standpoint. We wanted this to come off as a really fun burger and shake type place where you can have a good time, have really indulgent treats, and the plant-based aspect was sort of secondary, sort of plant-based, you know, not by accident, but it's not the main idea. The main idea is to have really delicious food, a really great time, and to have like a full experience. So, you know, it was important for us to align with other brands that do that. And Christine showed some work for Shake Shack, which was actually one of the things that obviously we looked at and were inspired by, because at the time they didn't have any plant-based. And so this was kind of positioned to be the plant-based Shake Shack. The second thing that we did a lot of with by Chloe is, you know, really promote the educational aspect of eating plant-based. So at the time, it was not as widely accepted or, you know, kind of in our habits. And so we really wanted people to understand why there was value in eating plant-based, what, you know, how that affects the environment, health, all of those things. And so there was a big educational component that we provided through a series of printed collateral materials. There were postcards, there were booklets, there were coloring books, and kind of at a lot of corners of the concept, there were sort of little facts and tidbits about kind of the value of eating a plant-based diet, whether it's 7 days a week or 1 day a week. And so that was a big part of the project. And then the last thing is that by Chloe was really a 360 approach from a branding, you know, food, interior design. It really brought everyone together to touch on every aspect of the experience. So it wasn't just about the logo and the packaging, it was also the signage, it was also the wayfinding, it was the way that here you can see the order screens communicate with the customers. It was in the, you know, graphics that covered the grab and goes. Like there was really everything that you looked at was a point of communication, whether that was communicating facts or whether that was communicating just the emotion of the place, the excitement, the fun. And so that was a really important part of, I think, the success of this is that once you step through the door of a by Chloe, you're in another world. You're in their world, and everything was considered the tiniest detail to the biggest neon or wall piece. Mike.
Thank you so much, Laureen. Beautiful imagery you're showing, and just like shows such a wide range. You know, I wanted to touch on what you alluded to at the end about this integrating all of these various elements, right? It's not just about one image or one piece of collateral, anything like that. And I think it's something that people in the food industry and food service industry can resonate with, right? Because as a restaurateur, you've got to hit on not just the food, but the lighting, the vibe, the service, the tables, etc. You know, how do you kind of approach like working with all these multidisciplinary people, and like what are some of the important things to keep in mind to make that whole dance go really well?
So yeah, as you said, I think, you know, the dining experience, even though we're being deprived of that right now, is like very much a 360 experience. It's about the interior design, the branding, the music, you know, kind of everything that happens once you enter that space. From our standpoint, we work very closely with all the people who are involved in creating this big picture. So we do work very closely with the interior designers, the photographers, and, you know, even looking at the menu and how, you know, how things are being planned so that we can reflect that in our visuals. And sorry, what was I going to say? From our perspective, it's really important to use any moment and any opportunity we have as a point of communication. So it can be a serious thing that you're communicating, like, you know, facts about plant-based diets. It can be just kind of something silly that speaks to the larger, in this case, you know, emotional side of the brand. You know, and then there's all the things that you need to know when you're in a space, like where to go, what to order, where to read, like things like that. So we really get our hands in everything if we can, and try to give people those branded moments as many points as they can. Like, you know, even the bathroom signage, in By Chloe, we had signage on the mirrors. So there was really never a point where the brand wasn't speaking to the customer, so to speak.
Got it. Yeah, getting that consistency to go through is so important. You mentioned, I thought there was a really interesting, the work you showed around educating around plant-based, and obviously, the plant-based conversation, you know, is really not just about the food so much as there's a really heavy kind of sustainability conversation that comes along with it as well too. I'm curious, kind of, you know, there's and that sustainability conversation is so insanely complex and nuanced, right? And we're not trying to solve that here, but how do you think you guys, and this is for both of you as designers and creatives, kind of can play a role to help all of that complexity and nuance come across to people in a way that kind of resonates, but doesn't greenwash or water things down?
I think it's mostly making the information available to people. You know, when we design for plant-based or really anything, there's different, you know, there's a hierarchy of information. There are things that are very loud and we want to make sure people know them, and then it kind of narrows down to other small parts where it's like the person who's really interested is going to read that smaller print. And so I think you put the information out there in the non-preachy way, because that's not the goal, and give people the opportunity to kind of educate themselves. You know, with By Chloe and with other plant-based, we know we can't put everything out in the world literally, and so then their other channels become platforms for some of these things. Their websites, their social, those are all opportunities to reach out to people, to inform them, and to make available the information if they want it.
Got it. Awesome. Christine, anything to add to that?
I think just going with what Laureen just said, is just like getting the information out there. It's also just to photograph more of it. I mean, because it hasn't been around that long in terms of like a movement. But now that, and also, you know, what I did want to say is that it's like appealing to a younger audience. I mean, for better or for worse, it's actually the Weekday Vegetarians came about because her teenage daughters, and I think that generation is more, I don't know what the word is, but like more with it in terms of like what's happening with the world and, you know, health, sustainability, just politically informed, things like this. And appealing to that generation is, I think, will then go, the reaches will be far and wide, especially because they're on social media and all of that. So I'm not sure what that means visually. I think that actually, Laureen, your aesthetic is very appealing to that generation, and that's awesome for that, getting that all out there. So.
Well, this is a particular case, that was very much made for that generation. But I actually think that that generation has a lot more information than the older generations who are coming into this and trying to figure out what's all this plant-based business about. And so they're also a huge market to consider in terms of, who you're communicating to. The 20-somethings know everything about plant-based. They're down with the lingo and everything. So they're not as, there's not such a educational curve with them as there is with older generations who are trying to incorporate this into a very established habit or lifestyle.
Good point.
Excellent. Yeah, to the audience, I want just a quick reminder that if you have any questions, please throw them up in the chat or the Q&A. One thing, Christine, you alluded to was this idea of, you got to try to make these things look unctuous, right? And related to that, I think, Laureen, you talked about how you tried to relate back the plant-based by Chloe to something that was kind of like traditional fast food, Shake Shacks and stuff like that, because that has a so it feels like there's been this traditional sense of what unctuous has been over the past few decades, especially if you look at food media. It's always been the big juicy steak in the middle of the plate, so to speak. How do you think this definition of unctuousness is changing?
That's interesting you say that, Mike, because I didn't immediately think of meat when you said unctuous.
Oh, interesting. That's just my bias speaking up.
For me, it's just about, gosh, how do you say it in words? I mean, it's something that's going to be savory and it's going to fill your belly up. So that's the kind of feeling that I want. And then, in terms of photographing the plant-forward foods, it's pasta is really easy to do that with because it's pasta. And then we did just literally put, creamy, oily, fatty things extra onto these dishes that may not have had that much, but visually speaking, we did do that. So it was quite literal in that way. And then also just making sure things look abundant. So even if it's not creamy, we want that spread to look like it's going to be incredibly fulfilling.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I'm curious, you also alluded to this a little bit, are there different kind of sets of tools you use when you're trying to market to kind of vegetarians and vegans versus flexitarians and meat eaters? How do you change up the playbook, if at all?
That's one for you, Laureen, I think. I don't, photographically, I don't think in those
Well, I think
terms.
we have the same answer, which is that
which is this.
We don't change the playbook. That's the whole point, once upon a time, plant-based, vegetarian foods, they all sat in this weird category of craft paper and not appealing design. And the whole movement has been to align them with all the other things that we're used to seeing in a package or in a restaurant and not put them in that corner anymore. They occupy the same space in our daily habits and in our life, and they should visually be represented that way. So I think, one of the things that we did when we did by Chloe was we weren't trying to align with a vegetarian aesthetic or a plant-based. We were aligning with the fast food burger joints, that emotion of fun and decadent, junk food, so to speak. We weren't selling health or salad leaves. We were selling, really filling burgers, fries, and stuff that people eat when they want to have a really good time, like with their friends, after school, whatever, Saturday night.
You're right. That's why I couldn't speak to that, because it's like the same. It should be as every day as everything else. And so that's how we're approaching it. Yeah.
Yeah. What I want to kind of close out on sort of, what gets you all inspired, and, in specific to that, like what kind of new motifs or styles or storytelling approaches have you seen sort of recently that might be helping you kind of, do your work a little bit differently? Like what inspires you all when it comes to food imagery and design?
Everything. Everything. I think we're inspired, Christine mentioned before, like sounds and tastes, and we're inspired by all the things that are around us. And in our case, the creative result is led by a client, a market, and trying to bridge those things, and creating the right thing for the right person, which has a different outcome every time. So there's a ton out there to be inspired by.
And for me, go ahead.
No, sorry.
That's it. Okay. No, I was just thinking about trends, and like I'm not a trendy sort of person. So for me, it's always been about what I can find in nature. That's my number one source of inspiration. And then secondly, it's all of my colleagues and my friends and people. So it's whatever, like everyone is such an individual thing about them. So whenever I'm working, it depends on who I'm working with, but I'm always most excited about that, about the person I'm working with and what they're bringing, and how we can like, synthesize that together to maybe make a new trend. I don't know. But yeah, largely, I don't think that I pay attention to trends in per se. Yeah. It's just more about the people around me and what we're coming up with together while we're doing it.
That kind of segues into my next question, actually, before we close out, is, we've gotten a chance to see both of your great work here, and the audience, I think, has appreciated that. Who's one person that you may have worked with or you just admire that you think the audience might also love to check out?
I have to think about that.
Oh, man.
Yeah, there's so many.
Like, pressure's on.
Yeah. Gosh, I have no idea. I know. But the audience should check out.
Or anyone who's interested in just, who you always say is like, wow, that the food imagery coming out of this person's work is just great.
Oh my God, why is it such a... We'll run out of time before we've had the answers.
Yeah. We run out of time, Mike.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, why don't you think about that for a moment? I'm going to ask everybody to stay tuned, because I'm going to ask the presenters to give us a one-sentence wrap-up after I share some details. So maybe in that moment, you'll come up with your answer as well. But I just want to give you some instructions for the upcoming networking break, which is sponsored by Nestle Professional. You can see Asha Gomez, Michael Harlan-Turkle, and Linda Hsu in sessions for Meet the Author Conversations. On the left, you can click the networking tab and be randomly paired with someone for a 4-minute video chat. Today's topic is, did you start or continue a garden during the pandemic? And if so, what are you growing? And also be sure to visit the innovation hubs to see culinary demonstrations, insightful presentations, and plant-forward inspiration from our generous sponsors. Finally, I want to say, enjoy the next 20 minutes networking break, and then we will see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific and 1 p.m. Eastern. And Mike, I'm going to start with you. If you could give us your one-sentence takeaway from today's presentation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all about paying attention. I think so much of it, I think being a good creator really starts with being just really attentive and paying attention to everything in the world. You're right. It's not about a trend. It's just, how do you digest everything that you kind of see in the world, and then sort of turn that into something interesting or creative. That's kind of what I took away. Yeah.
Great. And Laureen?
I think when it comes to, food branding. It's all about that full experience, and it's about the details all coming together to make this, you know, one very intentional and wonderful experience for the consumer or the guest or whatever it is. And that's, you know, what we, with the help of people like Christine and other extensions of what we do, strive for in all of our work.
Great. And Christine?
My message is don't overcomplicate, keep things simple. I mean, really, our minds tend to spin out on a lot of things, and really, like, simple sells, simple is good. And, you know, and also take the dish to the window, don't shoot it in the overhead restaurant lighting. Like, that's, you know, that's a thing. That'll just up your game, like, you know, a lot just by doing that. But yeah, just keep it simple.
Okay, great. Well,
Yeah.
thank you all so much for this wonderful and very inspiring session. We really appreciate you being with us. And
Thank
everybody,
you.
Thank
Have a
you,
good one.
Patricia.
take care.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.